What if the smallest choice you make today quietly rewrites the person you will wake up as tomorrow? I ask myself this every morning, usually in that half-alive space before my focus returns, before motivation remembers my name, before dopamine makes any promises. There's a strange paradox buried in my routine. My life changes most on days when I feel least capable of changing anything. It's as if laziness and attention have become opposing gravity fields, each pulling at my sense of who I might become. I used to believe identity formed from dramatic moments, the big decisions, the rare surges of clarity, the cinematic turning points. But now I suspect something far more unsettling, that the real transformations happen in the unseen corners of ordinary days, inside the micro-choices I make on autopilot. And that's where the trouble begins. Because every time I reach for the easy path, every time I say, I'll start tomorrow, every time I let my learning drift or my attention scatter, I feel a subtle shift under my skin. Not a collapse. Something quieter, like a slow redirection of my inner compass. Nietzsche once whispered that the smallest acts reveal the deepest will. William James warned that habit builds the architecture of our future. Together they form a haunting equation. My daily choices are not decisions, they are instructions. They tell my future self who to become. But I don't always like the instructions I give. There's a moment, right before my day fully begins, when I sense the weight of this truth pressing against my chest. A kind of existential humidity, heavy and invisible. I feel the tension between the self I want and the self I repeatedly choose. And in that tension lives the question that has followed me for years. If the smallest choice changes me, what am I becoming in the shadows of my own routine? I don't have the answer yet, but I can feel the story pulling me toward it. Thank you for listening to this first breath of the journey. If these reflections resonate with you, I'd be grateful if you chose to stay close, subscribe, comment, or simply remain here with me as we unfold the rest together. I woke today with the familiar jolt, that small internal crack that opens before thought has time to organize itself. It wasn't dramatic, just a sudden awareness that something in me had shifted overnight, as if my identity had been quietly edited while I slept. I keep pretending my life changes in grand movements, but the truth arrives like a whisper I can't ignore. I am becoming the sum of my smallest choices. Not the choices I brag about, but the ones I barely notice. The way I reach for my phone before reaching for myself. The way I postpone what matters and prioritize whatever is closest to my hand. The way I let my attention fray until it feels normal. These little acts pile up like sediment, layering into a version of me I never consciously chose. And the shock is this. I can feel it happening while it happens. A subtle internal rearrangement, a soft erosion of self-trust. Every micro-decision becomes a question I ask without wanting to ask it. Are you shaping yourself or slipping away from yourself? It's strange how such tiny motions carry such heavy weight. I used to think focus was something I earned through willpower. Now I see it as something I leak through indifference. I used to think motivation arrived to rescue me. Now I see it waits for me to move first. Nietzsche once insisted that every small act reveals my deepest valuation of life. William James argued that even if I don't feel willing, I must act as if I am. Their voices collide in me, not as teachers but as mirrors reflecting the truth I try to outrun. My daily choices are not neutral. They are directional. Every yes and every no draws an invisible map of the person I will meet tomorrow. And I wonder, brutally, honestly, how many tomorrows I've already shaped without meaning to. How many versions of myself I've abandoned by choosing what was easy instead of what was aligned. There's something heartbreaking in that realization, but also something liberating, because if small choices can unravel me, they can also rebuild me. If I can create the drift, I can create the direction. Thank you for walking with me through this first shift. If something in these words stirred you, I'd be grateful if you stayed close. A comment, a quiet subscription, or simply your presence as we continue. I remember the exact morning when the truth exposed itself, not through philosophy, but through something embarrassingly ordinary. I stood in my kitchen, half awake, staring at two options: brew the coffee I promised myself I'd make, or tap my phone and order it delivered. Again. It was nothing, a trivial choice, a moment most people would shrug at. But as my finger hovered over the screen, I felt a strange heaviness, like the universe had paused to watch. I had told myself for weeks that I was trying to rebuild discipline, that I wanted to reclaim my learning, my focus, my attention. And yet here I was, choosing convenience over commitment, comfort over the tiny effort that would tell my future self, I can trust you. In that quiet kitchen, I felt the fracture. Not dramatic, just painfully clear. I realized laziness isn't the absence of effort. It's the erosion of intention, a slow forgetting of the person I say I want to be. I told myself it didn't matter, that it was just coffee, that I deserved ease. But the truth lingered under my skin. Small choices teach me how to treat myself. They signal whether I honor my word or negotiate it away. That morning wasn't about caffeine. It was about identity. I finally brewed the coffee myself, but the victory didn't feel like triumph. It felt like exposure. I saw how many moments like this had slipped by unnoticed, skipping a reading session because my dopamine was low, avoiding a task because my motivation felt thin, drifting through the day with scattered attention because discipline seemed too heavy to lift. None of these moments were catastrophic, but together, they were shaping me more than any major life decision ever had. As the kettle hissed and the aroma filled the room, I felt both shame and clarity. Shame for how easily I abandoned my intentions. Clarity because I could no longer pretend that my daily micro-choices were harmless. They were carving me. They were silently deciding who I would become. It's strange how a simple morning can become a turning point, not through drama, but through truth. Thank you for walking with me into this small, vulnerable scene. If it resonates, I'd be grateful if you chose to stay, whether through a quiet subscription, a soft comment, or simply continuing this journey with me. I didn't invite either of them into my life, Nietzsche or William James, yet somehow they took residence in the quieter parts of my mind. They don't speak to me as voices, but as pressures. Nietzsche arrives first, often when I'm hesitating. He doesn't ask questions, he exposes them. His presence feels like standing too close to a fire, raw, clarifying, merciless. He reminds me that every small decision is a declaration of who I believe I can be. When I choose the easier path, he forces me to see the silent confession within it, that I expected less of myself. His intensity isn't about perfection, it's about honesty. He makes me confront the parts of me that want to hide behind excuses, behind low dopamine, behind the story that motivation should come before action. With him, there is only the truth of what I choose. But James waits patiently on the other side, calmer, steadier. He doesn't pressure, he demonstrates. He reminds me that habit is the unseen architecture of my life, that action precedes feeling, that I can act as if long before belief catches up. Where Nietzsche challenges my spirit, James rebuilds my psychology. He offers me a strange comfort, that even when my will feels fragmented, I can move anyway. That small steps shape the pathways motivation eventually follows. He doesn't ignite me, he stabilizes me. Their tension lives inside me like two opposing winds shaping the same landscape. Nietzsche pushes me toward a fiercer self, a self forged through deliberate choices that express strength. James guides me toward a practical self, a self built brick by brick through repeated action. Together they form a kind of inner climate, sometimes stormy, sometimes instructive. And I realize the conflict isn't between them. It's between the parts of me that fear responsibility and the parts that crave transformation. In this strange companionship, I learn something unsettling and liberating. I don't need to wait to feel ready. I don't need to wait for focus or motivation or the perfect emotional alignment. I just need to choose repeatedly. until the choosing becomes natural. The pressure of Nietzsche and the guidance of James are not adversaries. They are the two hands shaping the clay of who I am trying to become. Thank you for sharing this space with me. If this exploration resonates, I'd be grateful if you stayed close, through a comment, a quiet subscription, or simply continuing this journey at my side. I began to see my life not as a timeline but as a workshop, and myself as both the sculptor and the unfinished stone. At first, this metaphor felt dramatic, almost pretentious, but then it started revealing things I had ignored for years. Every choice, the small, forgettable ones, became a chisel stroke. When I practiced focus for even 5 minutes, I carved a line of intention. When I resisted the easy escape into distraction, I shaped a contour of integrity. But just as powerfully, when I let myself drift, when I surrendered to laziness disguised as comfort, it wasn't neutral. It was dust settling. And dust left untouched becomes a surface you no longer recognize. I started noticing how the dust gathered in real time. Not physical dust, but the soft accumulation of decisions made without awareness. Skipping a moment of learning because it felt inconvenient. Breaking a promise to myself because I assumed tomorrow would forgive me. Letting my attention scatter until I no longer trusted it to stay. Every time I did this, a thin layer of dust settled over the sculpture of the person I wanted to be. Too light to notice at first, too gentle to threaten me, yet persistent enough to dull the shape of my becoming. Nietzsche's fire made me see the sculpture as possibility, a testament to the will that shapes its own form. But James reminded me that sculptures aren't carved in epiphanies. They're made through repetition, that every stroke, however small, matters. I realized with equal parts dread and hope that I wasn't waiting for some future transformation. I was actively creating one, or delaying it, with the most mundane gestures. So the question became painfully clear. Was I sculpting, or was I letting myself be covered? There's something humbling about seeing your life as a statue half hidden beneath the residue of your own avoidance. But there's also something deeply empowering, because the dust isn't permanent. It yields to the very first intentional touch. One deliberate action clears a surface. One moment of focus reshapes a line. One choice breathes life back into what had begun to fade. Thank you for staying with me as the metaphor deepens. If this reflection touches something in your own journey, I'd be grateful if you lingered a bit longer, through a comment, a quiet subscription, or simply by continuing into the next chapter with me. There came a moment when the conflict inside me reached a quiet breaking point. Not loud, not heroic, but unmistakably decisive. It arrived in the middle of an ordinary afternoon, the kind that usually slips through my fingers without leaving a trace. I felt the familiar pull toward distraction, the soft magnetic hum of avoidance calling me into its arms. But something in me resisted, not out of strength, but out of recognition. I realized I had stood in this moment 1,000 times before, always interpreting it as fatigue, or low motivation, or a temporary lack of attention. But now I saw it for what it truly was. A crossroads disguised as routine. If daily choices were shaping me, then this was the place where I chose who I would become tomorrow. I remembered Nietzsche's insistence that my smallest decisions declare my essence, and James's patient reminder that action trains the soul to believe in itself. Their philosophies didn't clash now. They aligned like two beams of light cutting through the fog. Nietzsche gave me the courage to confront myself. James gave me the method to rebuild. And together they offered 4 techniques that felt less like strategies and more like instruments in the ongoing sculpting of my life. First, the 1-minute beginning. Act before you feel ready, not to achieve much, but to signal who you intend to be. Second, the single-point focus. Choose one task and remove everything else from the moment, clearing the dust before it settles. Third, the identity micro-promise. Make a commitment so small it's impossible to break, because trust grows from kept promises. Fourth, the returning breath. Pause, inhale, and step back into yourself when you drift, not with shame, but with intention. These weren't grand transformations. They were openings. Tiny, honest beginnings that revealed a direction I could trust. I felt something loosen inside me, a knot I had mistaken for permanence. The emotional shift wasn't triumph. It was permission. Permission to become someone I hadn't yet met. Permission to shape the stone rather than surrender to the dust. Permission to treat my tomorrow as something earnable. As I stepped back into my day, I felt a subtle, luminous clarity. Becoming myself is not a future event. It is a current choice repeated into existence. Thank you for walking with me through this entire journey. If this narrative moved something in you, I'd be grateful for your quiet presence. A subscription, a soft comment, or simply staying connected as we continue shaping the selves we are becoming.